welcome to the next episode of Why We Do It, the stories behind the stories in amateur sports. And today we're actually going back a fair number of years, Andy, in my experiences. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Andy Deans, welcome. How are you doing?
Very well. Great to see you. Yeah, very nostalgic.
Yes, absolutely. And boy, have you got a story like so many of the others who've come on this, and I'm so pleased that you have come on. The people always say to me, "Oh, I'm not sure I've got much of a story," and then I coerce them a little bit, and they send the notes, and oh my God, here we go. There's some fun stuff to talk about on this episode. So it's a story of multi sports, rugby, cricket, and a lot of other things. We'll get to all of that hopefully in due course, but we start with the ideal sponsor. If you could be sponsored by anyone. And you've got a lovely note in the comment in one of your notes about basically why you do it. It's almost the first thing you address in your notes, and it almost answers that question why you do it. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But it finishes with "and of course for reasons you do sport, and of course the socializing !" So that's why it makes complete sense that your ideal sponsor is Laphroaig whiskey from the famous Isle of Islay in Scotland. I think it's really obvious, but go on, tell us why you picked Laphroaig Distillery and Laphroaig whiskey.
That was a great question, actually, and made me think. But then I thought, first of all, it's Scottish. The brand, I think they're overtaken by a big Japanese company now, I think, in terms of the big boys. And it's classy. I think it's classy in terms of if you were going to have a sponsor. Scottish, a good brand, respect, and I wouldn't mind being sponsored by Laphroaig.
Makes total sense. And the Scotland links is a good one because you grew up in Scotland. You haven't really lived in Scotland that much, I think, since you grew up here. You've been all over that. You've spent most of your life in the army. That'll become a big part of the story. But Scotland's always been a strong part of your heritage. Even though has your accent changed a bit? Have you lost it?
Well,
I went really pick up much. Yeah, go on.
No, very bland. I mean, I went to primary school in Aberdeen, and then at sort of 12, secondary school near Oxford. And my nickname at school was Jimmy because I turned up with an Aberdonian accent. But that soon went away in terms of probably all the ridicule that I got.
You worked hard.
They still call
hard to drop that.
Yeah, they said they still call me Jimmy.
All right, good, excellent. Well, things like that. Again, you said nostalgia at the beginning, so I'm sure that is a not too unpleasant memory. Hopefully now, we're going to start in the middle of the story in a way. Well, near the middle, beginning middle, with a significant event. And I'm doing a lot of talking up front here, but let's set the scene. I want to explain to folks where I first heard your name and how I first came across you. I played a bit of rugby in the army. I didn't get to a very high level. I think I played for the army in Germany at one point. There was one game I showed up for that. You and I played rugby. We'll come back to that later. But at some point when I was early stage in the army, people were talking about the Army Rugby Team and the Army Navy rugby game. And that's a pretty big deal in the military kind of cycle of events. And I remember distinctly sitting there and having a cup of tea in some officer's mess somewhere. And someone said, "Who's the captain of the army team right now?" And some guy who knew you said, "Oh yeah, it's this guy called Andy Deans." And I'd never heard of you and met you, but for some reason, maybe because of my interest in rugby, the name stuck. And then several years later, still in the army, my phone rang on my desk one day. I picked it up, and this voice said, "Hi, this is Major Andy Deans. I am," and I was like, "Yeah, I know exactly who you are, Andy. I'm Jim." And then it turned out that we didn't realize we lived actually kind of 5 doors down from each other on the same army base, and friendships and between us as two couples kind of really, really grew from there. But we're going to start with that whole kind of captain of the Army Rugby Team. You were a second lieutenant in the army, which I actually didn't realize until I read your notes. So it's a heck of a story. Tell us about your Army Rugby, your being a captain of the Army Rugby Team alongside international players there, and your whole experience with that and that game, particularly against the Navy.
Well, it was a little bit of a shock, really. Sort of commissioned from Sandhurst, and you play sport there, and then I'd been highlighted from Sandhurst saying you've got a good chance of maybe getting into the Army team, etc. But that was never even on my radar, to be honest. I'd never been to the Army Navy game before in terms of in past life, so didn't really understand the magnitude, and it all happened very quickly. So that first season, I was playing at London Scottish, so that was where I was playing the club rugby, and that was a pretty good standard. And then I got drafted in for the first game I played for the Army was what was then the Territorial Army. You play the Territorial Army before Christmas. That was a sort of warm up, and then there's a whole load of games leading to about 5 or 6 games that lead then into the Army Navy game in the spring, really. And I was just a second lieutenant and playing. I didn't skip until halfway through the season. Was lucky enough to do that. But yeah, it was. I was pretty in awe. You know, Tim Rodber, who was an international
right next to you there.
Yeah, and the next with George Graham, who was Scottish international. Yeah. So they were my little minders there for second lieutenant deans. And they were sort of really experienced soldiers there that had done lots and seen lots, and there was I put in as a skipper, which was
So you said in this note, you said in the note, I'm going to jump down to this because it's funny that you I think it's worth highlighting. You said here, and I know you well enough to know you're a really humble and kind of non-bragging type of guy, so I'm going to have to drag some of this out of you. But you said I somehow seem to end up as the captain of teams: school rugby, cricket, university rugby, core rugby and cricket, army and combined services. And then you put in brackets, and this is just so Andy Deans, I never went looking for it, I promise. So just how did that happen?
Yeah,
and I mean, you got international rugby players playing in this Army team, and Second Lieutenant Andy Deans is the captain.
Well, I think because I'd had the experience of being a skipper from school, universities, and other representation, it came quite naturally. So they probably said, round stick in a round hole. But also playing fly half, you kind of controller, you can see the game, etc. So it was probably not just one thing. It probably fitted into the and the forwards always win the match. It's the backs do it by how much. So you need a really good leader
and take all the glory
front anyway. Well, try not to, but yeah. So and that was it was interesting because back then, even though we were at Twickenham, it wasn't all sold out. So there'd be about 20,000 people there for the Army Navy game. If you're thinking that was the first game, 1990, 1991, and then when later on, when I was running as chairman and director, etc., we then on our watch filled the whole of the stadium. We had a
I remember going a few years later, and it was. Yeah, I remember going to the game after you played. I went a few years later, and wow, massive event. So tell us about that. Okay, so not quite a full Twickenham, but holy cow, you're playing at Twickenham. There's a big crowd. What do you remember about the game itself against the Navy? And I'm going to put this up because spoiler alert, you won, and there's you with His Royal Highness behind you, kind of with the trophy. So just tell us about the whole day and the game itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a big build-up. You stay in a hotel in London, and then you that whole day, if I'm really honest, is a bit of a blur in terms of it all happened very quickly. I remember the Prince Edward, when he comes to inspect all the team, I actually forgot 2 of the guys' names, but because I was thinking of other things, and I was so upset with myself afterwards. I said, "Sorry, Jimmy." It was Jimmy Fowers, and I just had a blank. And I mean, I'd never really experienced that. I played at Northampton where you had about 15,000 screaming people, but Twickenham was a little bit different. And I always, because it's such a, in terms of a tradition between the Army and the Navy. I mean, the Navy buses would have left Plymouth probably about 5 o'clock in the morning. And obviously I remember getting out of the bus, about to make my way into the stadium. and looking at these buses of Navy supporters, some of them actually on top of the bus, and it was just like I thought, well, this is going to be interesting because they were from and they were shouting and very tribal, really tribal. So I hadn't really experienced that. And then actually the game itself, and it's a bit like what Tim Rodber said when I brought him back to present shirts. He said that first 10 minutes of an Army Navy game is probably the hardest, experience you're gonna. He said, even playing for England, he says that first 10 minutes against the Navy, you were in for a fight. Yeah.
Wow.
And there was also a few of not that game, but two of the other games which were filmed, BFPS and whatever. But there was always a bit of violence in it, and between the Army and the Navy. And one time there was quite a big fight. Obviously, I was a little fancy fly half, didn't really get to the action by the time it was all over. By the time I got there, and it was on the news at 10 about violence and sport. And my mum says, "I've just seen you on the telly." I said, "Well, I didn't punch anybody, did I?" So yeah,
didn't get there in time. Otherwise, I might have.
Pretty. Yeah, it was very. It was one of those experiences in terms of it was hard. They wanted. There was so much pride at stake with these service men and women. It wasn't the highest standard, I'll be honest, but it was brutal.
Well, you got internationals playing. I mean, there's going to be some high standard. You do, but it's funny story about Tim Rodber. I have to call that one out and see what that's about.
Well, that was when I later on. I mean, this is about 8 years ago now. When I was still in the Army and I was director of rugby, then I became chairman. But when I was initially director, it was such a big game, and with we had about 7 new caps for that game, and I invited Tim to come back and give out the shirts and stay in. And his wife and my wife Nikki came along. We had a cup of coffee, and then I said, "Well, I'll take Tim away. It's all prepared there." And Tim said to me, "Because I'm really quite nervous. I haven't been back in a rugby environment or the Army environment for about 5 or 6 years." And I went, "Oh, you're Tim Rodber. You walk through walls and tackle people, into oblivion. Yeah. What are you scared of?" Yeah. He says, "Well, no, I don't know." And then I went, "Oh dear, this could be embarrassing if he goes to pieces up in front." And so he's up in front of all these Army rugby players, a lot of Fijians as well. So when I introduced and said that Tim Rodber, actually British Lion, but he won the inaugural World Sevens competition and Murrayfield, which was another, and then all the Fijians sort of nodded and went,
"I like that, yeah,
good stuff." And Tim goes, "How many of you here have played at Twickenham before?" And he goes, and there was about half of them were new caps, and they hadn't played at Twickenham. And he recalls the first time he played against the Navy, and he says, "I was really quite intimidated and scared, and I didn't know what to do, etc." And when I packed down, because he played at lock when at that age, and one of the Marines who was propping for the Navy had written on his thigh, "I'm going to kill you, Rodber," in felt tip. And Tim had seen this and thought, all right. And he actually did get whacked, in the first few minutes. They were trying to sort him out. And he said, "Well, actually, in my life, I turned around and said, no, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take a step backwards." And I went chasing him all day and beat him up. So he said, that was, and Tim then got into his stride, and it all went swimmingly in terms of the presentation. But yeah, I thought, Tim, the Tim Rodber I knew would never have been, shy and nervous. He was for that few seconds.
Brilliant. So let's go back to the beginning. We're flying through already, and that's such an amazing story to touch on. And we're gonna do a bit more rugby in a minute, but let's just go back to the beginning. You've actually answered the overall question, so I'm going to just read it out because I think it's just such a concise and great way to summarize why you've done all the things that we're starting to hear about and we will hear about. You said that you've always loved sport, you love competition, you love the physicality, fits with what we've heard. You love being with people. You allow how it developed you, the comfort zones, the unknowns, the exploiting potential and new skills, traveling, new cultures, and of course socializing. That's such a great summary of why someone would do the things you've done. So, but let's go back to the beginning. Go back to school. You mentioned you being up in Scotland. So, what was sport for you? What were you doing when you were still at school? How did sport develop? And I'll throw a picture up in a second of one of your teams.
Yeah, well, in primary school, I was at Robert Gordon's College in Aberdeen, and we were playing rugby, aged 8, proper, and it wasn't even touch, so it was proper, and we were wearing, I remember, shorts to school, and it was -5, and it was good, hardcore sort of upbringing in terms of school, but we had a fantastic opportunities. There was a guy we had great swimming pools. I loved swimming, and we had when Neil Cochran was in my year at school, and he then went on to become an Olympic swimmer. So we had all sorts of sports, even at the age of 6, 7, when I was boarding there, all the way up to 12. So I was very lucky in terms of getting that grounding. I would always say and I've got 3 kids, and same with you, is that teach them to swim, bit of gym and running, and you can't go wrong.
The rest will happen naturally
To start. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I was very lucky.
Hang on, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, because that's just really relevant to pop this up. Talking about our kids kind of grew up together for a couple of years. They were pals. This is you and I playing together for Ripon in Yorkshire. You pointed out before, you think this game was against Darlington. We've got 6 kids between us, and there's 3 of them. But I think I followed you in to on the back of your coattails into Ripon. They saw you. I showed up in the same car. They thought I might have the same skills. 5 games later, they realized I didn't. So I got dropped to the second team. But it was great fun playing with you. After all we've talked about in terms of hearing about you for the first time, to end up playing with you was a great honor, actually. So anyway, go back to school, and just because you mentioned kids, I thought I'd throw that up.
Yeah, no, it's great. And then I went then down to school in Tame near Oxford. Again, it was a comprehensive. It had been a grammar, but the schools have been converted to whole comprehensive, and I had a great legacy of sport in that school. So we were, again, I had really good. That's another thing about sport as well. You always remember your teachers and your mentors, and that was important. And it was a really good sort of ethos at school as well. And I'm still really friendly with that and whole set of friends, and many, they were rugby players and cricket players going all through school years, and still in touch today. And school was very much a grounding. Had some very good sort of leaders and role models in terms of the teachers, and there it is. That's the mighty Lord Bills, as we were called.
The Lord Bills. So that's you. It's hard to pick out in this picture. The hair, the kind of the 70s, 80s. We were what year is this? 80 something, mid 80s.
That is 1983 or 4.
Right.
I don't know if it's pre-Christmas or after Christmas.
The 70s hairstyles have kind of lingered a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So I'm in
the front next to the blonde Will Lewis. So
right in the middle there. And so this team, just tell us what team this was. I guess you were captain of this team based on what you said.
Yes,
before.
the school. Yeah, that was the school
first team.
First team. A lot of those. Some of those guys at the back went on to play very good rugby in terms of Neil Proven played for Scotland B, and next to him Steve Fenn played Richmond and Coventry. We were very lucky, and we had a good time. We won the national sevens, so we like to think for a comprehensive we were the ones that they're not the favourites when you were playing Millfield and all that kind of calibre.
The big schools. Yeah, fantastic. So before we move on from rugby, because there's so many other things to talk about, and I know we'll come back to it because you've already touched on it with regards to director of Army Rugby and then chairman of Army Rugby. We'll touch on that towards the end, but just final rugby thing that I remember particularly, and Ripon again, this time when we were both playing for this team in a game after this, when I was now no longer the fullback of choice, and you'd continued, by the way, with legs like tree trunks. Compared to my kind of bamboo kind of legs there, which was the difference between you and I in terms of rugby in some respects, apart from your amazing skills in all other regards. But tell us about, I remember being on the sideline for this game. Our wives were there, you were playing, and that night we were supposed to go to a social event after the game. You took a big hit in the game, and you kind of complained that you were you were feeling a little bit of a kind of knock from something that happened. We were supposed to go to a social event that night. You unusually, given your enjoyment of socializing, opted out. And Nikki, your wife, came with my wife Rona and I to this army event somewhere. I can't remember what it was. And then the next morning, you were in trouble. So tell us what was going on.
Well, that was I ruptured my spleen. So that was trying to charge down a kick. Yeah, well, I played to the rest, but I didn't feel particularly well, and I knew that there was something wrong because I didn't like my beer. And that never happens. So the indicator should have. And then it wasn't until the next day. Luckily, we had our neighbours were both doctors, and they came in and saw that I was as white as a sheet, and obviously. Then went to Harrogate, and luckily, because even back there, usually back then you'd have had your spleen taken out, and you'd be shaking with antibiotics for the rest of your life in terms of what would happen. But there was a very state-of-the-art consultant who was on. He knew. He said, "If you're young and strong, you think we can get you through it." And so, that was it wasn't very nice, but not losing your spleen was a little bit of an upside. But I didn't go and play Ripon again after that.
Was that the end of it then? You might have taken a while to recover from that, understandably.
I then went back down, and I still played. I played core rugby in the odd game, but not nothing proper in terms of clubs, because
I think we might have talked before about people who are as hard as nails. Before we came on, I can't remember if we were talking before we hit the record button or not, but we were talking about hard as nails, and I said, you in particular, and that's a great kind of example of it, because if that had been me, I would have been rolling around in the pitch and ambulanced off and stopped the whole game. But you keep playing, you try kind of to socialize afterwards, you try to go through the night, and then I think you collapsed. Didn't Nicky find you on the floor in the kitchen?
Yeah. Then in the morning, and the dog was jumping all over me, and and then next door neighbour, he came round and gave me an interesting suppository and try and make the pain go away, and so it was a good weight loss plan though, that's for sure.
Good. So always a silver lining. Yeah. But rugby is not the only thing. Cricket is as a number of other things. Cricket has been a big part of what you've been up to as well, has it not? So tell us about your cricketing story overall.
Yeah, I was reasonable cricket player, and at school was cricket captain. We played lots of cricket, actually played club cricket, etc. And then in the army, I played a few times for the army one season, but it was hard to mix it all in terms of, you'll remember that in the the rhythm of a year, especially when I was a very young officer and I was in a training establishment, you kind of had to pay back in terms of you couldn't play rugby and cricket full out. I did 1 year of
all
that,
the time.
and then I sort of got told by my sort of bosses, you can do one. But I played
like
the
to be
army
a professional
times.
sportsman. Yeah, there's another job to do.
Well, yeah, and that it puts you in. It put me in good stead actually about that balance when I then went into being chairman and running the ops, etc., for the Army Rugby. It was a kind of the empathy of trying to keep people's careers together as well as exploiting their potential on the sort of sports field as well, and trying to get that balance. Some of them you didn't really need to look after at all, but for some of them, especially the soldiers, you had to protect them, and you had to guide them to say, look, you might want to knuckle down and this year do your promotion or whatever. So we at school was playing everything. So cricket, we were particularly a good school for cricket. We were the only comprehensive school to play the MCC, which was a little bit of a feather in the cap for the school. Yeah, so for a comprehensive.
Absolutely.
So we
And you still play cricket today?
Before. I still play cricket today. I am, for my village, I am treasurer, secretary, and number 5 bat. And I play for the Ireland over 50s. Well, yeah, I think some of it's harder than others, but so it's keeps me going. Actually, and on the island here, it's quite sort of beautiful and picturesque. It's old school sort of cricket. It's quite nice, chocolate box pavilions and very sort of quaint little villages that you can go to and play. So yeah, still playing while I'm reasonably fit and agile-ish. So yeah, 60.
Fantastic, good for you. We'll come back to other stuff you're involved in now, but so you're talking here about sport in the Army in general, and you were getting into that subject. You're playing everything from water polo to basketball, but the whole looking after the guys, the operational element of life as well, the balance of the operational imperatives, as you say here, and you mentioned stories of Kenya and Belize in particular. Expand a little bit on that whole, and you mentioned 3-para being amazing. So just kind of unpack some of that.
Yeah, I mean that was I didn't play because we were so busy in 3-para. We were spearhead battalion and lead parachute battalion, so we were on call 48 hours practically for half the year. But had some amazing experiences with them in sport. So even when we went to Kenya, which was a live firing exercise that you went through stages all the way to a battalion attack right at the end, he did manage to organise this game we played. Came up to me and goes, I've got a team. We're the East African Farmers, and would you mind playing us sometime? And I did it over the phone. I said, well, and he said, well, yeah, here's a grid. He gave me a grid reference for where we were going to play. And I told the commanding officer and the RSM, and they were all up for a picnic and coming to watch.
What sport are we talking about?
Yeah. It was a Sunday afternoon. Rugby. So East African Farmers are divided, and they gave us a grid reference to get to. Mm-hmm. And so we had 3-4 tonners off into the zoo. And there wasn't a pitch. When I arrived at the grid, and the CEO's going, "What have you done?" And there was no pitch, there's no nothing. Looking around, and then a plane arrived, a little light plane, and then a whole series of other planes arrived, and then all these locals came out of nowhere and they marked a pitch, put up they made the poles and everything themselves, and so all these farmers arrived by plane from East. They were all over, not just from Kenya. Yeah. They were from all over, and it was absolutely amazing. In the end, and the whole of our head shed and the CEO that loved it because it was really interesting people, very well looked after in terms of. Remember the food was just amazing from the Kenyan. But that was one, and then in Belize. We did a tour. I did a company tour to Belize, and I remember we didn't play much sport, but we played. We put a football team together, and we played the prisoners of a notorious the Belize prison was a notorious place that not many people
I've
came
got
out.
a picture of this. Is that right? You sent me a
Yeah.
picture. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pop it up.
So that's us. If it comes up, yeah, those are the inmates that we're with. So
In
yeah,
Belize.
3 para, yeah, in Belize playing the prisoners, which was, again, in terms of learning and humility, and they were so grateful because we went to them, and obviously they didn't come to us, but we played in the prison and played against them at football, and it was, again, another amazing experience to talk to these youngsters.
Yeah, for the young soldiers as well, who you affectionately
Yes.
referred to as the hairy ass soldiers earlier on in your notes when we were talking about the Army Navy game. Yeah. You made a comment in here about the more senior I became, the more I try to defend sport as a part of personal and professional development. And I do find myself now, from time to time these days, talking to folks, friends or whatever, about time in the Army. And I mean, I was only in for 10 years, unlike you, and I didn't do anything particularly full on in terms of operational activity, which was a blessing in hindsight, as much as I wanted to at the time. But and sport was a huge part of my time in the Army. So that's when I talk about stories like that, you occasionally get the odd snide comment. Someone will go, "Oh, that's what our taxpayers are paying for." Then you're all having so much fun. But just give us an insight, as seeing as you spend so much more time on that as a concept or as a development tool, and tell us about why sport is important in the Army in general.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of factors. I mean, sport in its purity is still very good for servicemen and women in terms of fitness, teamwork. I mean, that's a good start for any kind of, if you're joining a firm, and, for the services, generally, it's predominantly teams, and the sport, you just take it to a different level in terms of the intensity sometimes. I mean, that intensity, especially for operations, almost replicates sometimes that kind of experience. But yeah, only in a kind of an analogy. But I think also, when young men and women and most soldiers only stayed in, the average was for 6 or 7 years max, was the average. They they joined for, because I was involved in the end of my career in MOD and a lot of recruiting policy, etc. Most people join the services, A, for adventure, and B, for development. Okay. Yeah. And sport sort of fits into that. It also, generally those kind of people who join the services do like sport. And of different varieties. And that's the wonderful thing in the services, is that, that's where I played when I was did a tour of Northern Ireland, and the RSM that worked for me was a water polo guy, Grenadier Guards, and he loved Duncan Grassick, loved his water polo, and he knew I could swim. I've never played water polo in my life, but I just went training twice a week with him and all the rest of them, and then they put me in goal. It was great, and then we played, but it was, again, another experience. I would have never
absolutely
done that, and again, I got to know him really well, and that was all part and parcel of service life. And also, you've got to, because they have to do, servicemen and women have to do some awful jobs sometimes. That kind of knowing that you can play football at the weekend or on a Wednesday afternoon, that breaks it up, and it makes life, and it breeds loyalty, and it breeds, and again, socializing is important in terms of getting to know your peers, maybe in a slightly different environment. It gets them, especially in the Army, and you'll remember, when you're a brand new second lieutenant and you're looking wide-eyed at the world around you, and you play with your seniors, or you play with your warrant officers, and you play with, and it kind of just gives another perspective of them as people. So yeah, I always found, I thought it was symbiotic. Sport was, sometimes there were clashes in terms of times and energy, and you couldn't play, because you were away on ops or exercise or something going on. But generally, there was a symbiotic relationship in terms of sport and the career.
And also, I guess, a kind of the pressure occasionally is quite intense. As you were speaking, I was thinking about comparing to corporate and life and working in business, or what would be effectively known as civvy street career. And I'll come back to that point. But before I go there, there's the release of tension, the release of pressure. You were the 3 para of all people on 48 hours kind of notice to move to anywhere. That can build up some tension. And paras have a reputation for being kind of highly strung, I guess. The whole paras and Marines kind of concept of rivalry that comes with all that. And did you feel that sport kind of gave sometimes a little bit of an outlet for that, just help people just get through things?
Yeah, I mean, controlled aggression. They love their boxing. Yeah. No.
That's true. Yeah.
But they love their boxing. So that was but again, it's discipline.
Yeah.
It's fitness. Yeah. It's technique and skills, etc. So there was always but you're right in terms of different people release their adrenaline and their psychological pressures in different ways. Sport is a good one. There's a good way to do that.
You just made me realize that a soldier could come from a kind of, I guess, a poor background, not had many opportunities growing up, never come across these sports, the opportunity to do these sports, certainly physical ones like rugby. Hey, come on, it's a really inclusive environment. Come and join in. Doesn't matter if you've never played before. And then they might be quite aggressive people generally, but suddenly they're in a controlling that aggression environment in a game where you can actually get quite aggressive, but within rules, but like boxing. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And it just made me compare. I said earlier that the business world, the business sector, you will get the corporate five-a-side kind of communities, people playing games against each other, and I guess we're talking in the most of the younger folks first half of their working careers, I guess, more than the older. Although obviously people like you and I carry on all the way through, and lots of people we talked on this podcast carry on as long as they can. But I just suddenly get this feeling of how much of that you just don't get that opportunity if you're in let's call it a normal career, a non-military career. So we were both, I mean, everyone has been through it very lucky, and I guess our stories are a good example of making the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just sport, but sport is an important part. But especially in the army, we used to be quite proud of the sort of social mobility. So, if you had especially soldiers that had, come from inner cities of Liverpool, Glasgow, Newcastle, London, whatever, and they only went to school when they were caught sometimes, and then they find their new world in the army and all these opportunities in terms of their professional and personal development. Some of them, took to it like duck to water, and they just lapped it up, and that was, I think, for me in all my sort of career, the most rewarding is seeing those, especially those people that sort of join with nothing and then end up with commissioning from the ranks, etc. So and generally, very few of them didn't like sport. There was always a football, or there was always something in the back of their mind in terms of what they played.
Final note to that, you've literally just reminded me. I was at an Army Air Corps Association dinner, which I hadn't been back to for a long time, just last year. And in the bar after the dinner, this guy came up to me and was like, "Jim, how are you? Good to see you." And I'm like, I can't remember who you are. Who are you? And he's like, I'm Woody. Do you not remember me? We played rugby in the corps team. And he was a lance corporal at the time, just like what you were saying. He was a lance corporal, and now he's a lieutenant colonel. He's still in the army. He's in his 50s. And I was like, wow, Woody, I do remember you now. And you're a lieutenant colonel commanding also of a regiment. Oh, my God, that's incredible. Good
He's
for
done.
you.
He's done very well then.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Exactly what you were just saying, actually. I don't know his background before the army, to be fair, but
Brilliant.
all right, we're into closing
Yes.
stages. So you talked about other activities. I mean, I guess this is a sport or not sport? Mountaineering. I mean, it's a close call, but you said not necessarily sport. It reminded me of this, and this is one of your life passions.
Yes. Well, and this is again. This is 3-power. This is coming Mount Kenya. In terms of, so one of the things I particularly enjoyed was mountaineering, and so I got myself, and that was the other thing. You just grab the opportunity. You do unit expedition leader, and then I did what was called joint services mountain expedition leader, and then a snow, etc. And then once you got that kind of qualification, there was no ending of invites to, or can you take this expedition to wherever and do whatever. But this was in between the phases. So one time we went for a rugby tour in between the phases of the live firing, and then I took a whole band of people about 5 times up and down Mount Kenya just to and they just absolutely adored it. Just as a footnote, that snow and glaciers, there was no more on Mount Kenya. All gone.
So this is probably 30 years ago, something like that.
This is third, so that'd be 1994.
Yeah, wow, that's scary and I would say unbelievable, but sadly believable. But you became qualified in leading expeditions.
Yes.
On this.
Yeah, and that was a passion as well in terms of just a real opportunity and it was good. I always thought it was just such a great soldiering skill as well for youngsters, for their navigation and fitness and realizing safety on steep slopes, etc.
Problem solving, unexpected circumstances. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and we did.
Fantastic.
Yeah, on that one we did have to. Somebody got altitude sickness and we had to cast back him off the mountain. But
right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Awesome.
Happy days.
Couple of more things. I realized I skipped something. We're going to go back just a tiny bit into the rugby for a second because I didn't actually know this. We've never discussed this, but you did a pre-season between university, I think, and before university with Northampton Saints, and you played 4 games. Give us the backstory there. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, so it was while I was at university. So I was at university in Aberystwyth, which is probably the most remote, in terms of accessibility.
Mountaineering skills are an advantage.
Well, that's why I did geography and geology, and the hills were, and the beaches were all on site.
Yeah.
But the and I had a really, again, comes down, had a wonderful coach, Gwyn Evans, who took a shine to me, and he says, well, why don't you just go and do a pre-season with all the fitness and then just see how it goes? Because I couldn't go back and forth all the time when I got there.
Right.
So, so I, for the 2 months before, so in that summer, and I couldn't drive back there. So I got picked up, and this was with Northampton. He'd sort of got me an invite to go training. And this is in June or July, or after the summer holidays. And so I couldn't drive, but the legend, the most capped prop at the time, a guy called Gary Pearce for Northampton, he came and picked me up and took me to training. So, there was this, getting taken to training by this absolute icon. And and all went well. And then I got into the first straight away, and we put the first. I used to get it was old school invitations. You got sent if you were selected. So, and the first game I played was at home against Bristol, and and I still remember it to this day. Packed out Franklin's Gardens. So I played 4 games, and then actually the second game was at Harlequins, and it was at Twickenham.
Wow!
and I always had. You could invite a couple of people because you got a few beers after the game, etc. And I invited my friend from school who was at college in London, and I said, Robbie, I've got tickets. You come along. And I remember coming out of the west. The changing rooms are on the west side, and you come out, and there was nobody in the whole of the other side of Twickenham, apart from Robbie, my mate, was in the other side going DZ. But yeah, so and he was the only one on the whole of that side of Twickenham. It was just
fantastic.
Like and the rest of the Harlequin supporters were in one stand behind us. And I couldn't. So I played. I got into, that was a bit of a pity that I didn't, go on and do it. But for me, it just sort of, I ticked a box. I felt as if I could do it. And I suppose that was probably
other fish to fry and the rest of life to get on with.
Correct.
Jeez,
correct.
Fantastic.
And then to do very well now. Also.
Yeah. We'll jump towards the closing stages. So then, in the latter time in your career in the Army, you mentioned a couple of times director of Army Rugby and then chairman. I mean, that must have been an unbelievable experience because of the things that were probably involved in that behind the scenes. And you talked about in the notes about dealing with Army guys who actually not only professional club players as well, but also internationals, that you were kind of managing that relationship between those clubs and the Army. So just tell us a bit about that senior end of the whole Army Rugby setup.
That was particularly challenging in terms of the one example I'll use. You probably heard the player for Gian, but did play for England, Samisi Rokoduguni, played for Bath. Funny now, he plays for Darlington. He's still paid.
He's got up to Yorkshire. Quite well, he's followed us.
Yeah, he followed. Yeah, but anyway, especially with him because he was just amazing back then and playing for Bath, and it was having to negotiate. He was now playing week in, week out for Bath first team, and he still is one of their top scorers ever at the club, and so they really wanted him all the time. But I said, well, actually, we pay his wages and we've developed him. I would quite like him for the Army Navy game and the RAF game. And that was difficult enough as it was. But I'd have to go and speak to the sort of main men of these clubs in order to sort of get them released properly. And it was all very contractual because we had to sign the contracts as well, because there was a lot of, at the time, we were adjusting because we had quite a few guys who were on contracts with clubs, and yet their main job, they were in the services. So it was quite convoluted in terms of, dealing with the policy on whether they could play for a club and be contracted with the club as well as being contracted with the Army. Bet. And Rokoduguni was a Scots Dragoon Guards, and it was his units were brilliant in terms of wanting him to fulfil his potential, and he was a good sort of publicity as well in terms of he would wear his uniform and look. Yeah,
that's extraordinary. You've got the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards wanting him to be a sniper. You've got the Bath Rugby Club wanting to play for Bath. You've got England wanting to play for England. You've got you chasing him to play for the Army. Crikey, the guy's in seriously high demand, and his whole kind of career is in 4 different places all at the same time.
And you're trying to look after him and his family as well.
Because he's So
that was what he was the star at the time for us. But there were about 4 or 5 others that were also playing professional rugby. So still in touch with Rocco. Actually, he's a very nice guy. But the interesting story, I think I mentioned it to you, was that that was because Iraq and Afghanistan were still in going on, and there was a lot of support in terms of help for heroes and the general consciousness of what the servicemen and women were going through.
The military
and so there was a
and all
very
that,
and there was therefore the Army Navy game became a real festival. Almost it became too successful in a way. That's what happened. But I remember we were at that time. We didn't use the top tier of Twickenham for the Army Navy game, and we were thinking with our public, and we had a really talented lady, Brenda, who was doing the ticket sales and publicity and posters and advertising, etc. And we said, well, we're getting 60,000 last year. Should we open up the top, because you have to invest in terms of the security and logistics, etc. So you'd have to put money aside, thinking to actually open up the top. And so we did some calculations, and we thought, and also we went then on to Ticketmaster, and you could buy these tickets by yourself online. And so we thought we'll take a punt, and we'll go with Twickenham and say, right, we're going to go for the whole 82,000, try and fill it. And we made that decision at a meeting on the Tuesday, and then we said, right, okay, they're going live tomorrow morning. And Chris, the secretary, rang me up halfway through the day, so after lunch, and I said, well, how's it going? He says, they've all gone. They've all gone.
That's
he says, he says, the tickets, they've all gone. So that's 82,000.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah. So but that was an amazing sort of feat, in terms of service sport to fill out. That was the biggest game of rugby in the whole of Europe that week.
So Andy, like so many others who come on this, we're in the 50+ minutes, and we could go for another hour, I think, quite easily. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. As I said, I had you in mind from the very beginning on this, and it's been fantastic to catch up with you. Your story is so interesting, and wow, what an amazing bunch of things you've done. And say hi to the family, and great to catch up. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Jim, it's been a pleasure, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in February.
Cheers. All the best. Bye.